Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com, and today I'm here with Nina Amir. Hi Nina.
Hi Joanna, nice to see you.
Yes, great to have you on the show. Just a little introduction. Nina is the best-selling author of How to Blog a Book, the Author Training Manual and other non-fiction, as well as an author coach and trainer, award-winning blogger and professional speaker. She founded National Nonfiction Writing Month and the Nonfiction Writers University, and her latest book is Creative Visualization for Writers, which we've got lots to get into. But Nina, you have such a long career in writing. Just give us a bit more of a background of how you got into writing and why you write nonfiction in particular.
So that's kind of a funny story, but I'll start at the beginning. I actually wanted to be a novelist when I started out. And, I was one of those people who read under the covers and, I was reading all fiction. And I told my mother that, and she's very practical. I don't think she meant anything bad by what she said, but I said, I want to be a novelist. And she said, well, only really good writers can make a living as a novelist. So I took that to mean that maybe I wasn't that good a writer.
Aww.
And so, well, I don't fault her because she was being practical, and it set me on a trajectory that changed my life, really. And I took a class in high school with a teacher who was teaching journalism. And I got really turned on by it. And I realized that one of the things I read was nonfiction, and that was magazines. I loved the magazines that, were telling you how to do things better, how to improve yourself. Like at that time, I remember reading Self magazine. But anyway, so I went to college and I got a degree in magazine journalism, and realized that that I really loved this. And it gave me a superb training in everything from design to editing, everything. Anyway, so I went out, I was a journalist. I worked for some magazines and I worked for some consultants and did a variety of things. And at one point, somebody asked me to edit a book, and it was a nonfiction book. And I remembered what my professor in college told me, which was that if I could write an article that I could edit, not that I could edit, but if I could write an article, I could write a book, because a book was just a bunch of magazine articles all on the same topic tied together. And so I thought, okay, well, I've been editing magazines, I've been writing for magazines, I should be able to edit a book. And I did. And the next book I edited went on to be quite successful. And so I edited a few that were picked up by big publishing houses and did very well. And so after editing for a little while, I thought, maybe I should write a book. My professor said I could do it. Maybe I should write a book. And that became my focus. But in the midst of all of that, I had this business where I was writing and editing, and I started a blog, my blog, Write Nonfiction Now, and then did my November event, Write Nonfiction in November, or National Nonfiction Writing Month, and began to really hone in on this nonfiction area. And I was interviewing and working with so many experts that, when you do that it's like you with your podcast, right? The more you immerse yourself and talk to experts, the more you become an expert. And that's what happened. I became an expert on nonfiction. As well as blogging, because of the one book on blogging and the blog. But anyway, so through all this, what I realized was I really had a passion for both publishing and writing, and for personal development and practical spirituality, which were two of the areas I really wanted to write about. And so I believe that, the people who write nonfiction have this opportunity to make a really positive and meaningful difference in the world with their words, that they can transform lives. And so that's what really turns me on about nonfiction.
But I know what everyone's thinking now, which is, are you writing a novel?
So the idea for National Nonfiction Writing Month came out of me doing NaNoWriMo. I had an idea for a novel, and I have to admit, I had about 3,000 words already written when I started NaNoWriMo, but I wrote another 50,000, so I completed. And I do have it, and I pitched it at the San Francisco Writers Conference one year, and got a lot of interest in it. But I write nonfiction, and so the book needs some help. It wasn't, everybody loved the pitch. The storyline works. It's just that I need to, get rid of adjectives, and it's just the technical stuff. And it starts, probably 50 pages later than it should, and it needs some work. So eventually, yes, there will be a novel.
Oh, good. I'm glad, because I'm really interested, because of course I started with nonfiction and moved into fiction, and I think when you are good at writing nonfiction, actually you realise writing a novel is very different, and there's a whole load of stuff you have to learn, and there is a big mindset shift to kind of start again, which is what you would basically have to do. So, but I wanted to bring that up because I know a lot of people have self-doubt around their ability to write creatively, and that was one of the questions. Is so many nonfiction authors say that they wish they were creative enough to write fiction, but actually there's a lot of creativity involved in nonfiction. So maybe how can nonfiction be just as creative, do you think?
So first of all, I think I would ask those people listening or watching to think about memoir, because memoir is nonfiction. I mean, it falls solidly in the nonfiction category, but it has to be written like a novel. Now, that's why I don't edit or memoir, because to me, I would have to have those skills, right? So it's very creative. You're working with a true story, but you need fiction writing skill to do it. So that's number one. I mean, there are essays, right? Essays can include anecdotes and that storytelling aspect that's very creative, but it's nonfiction. You can write nonfiction books that are peppered with personal anecdotes. And so there again, you have to tell the story, right? And a lot of memoir now is mixed with nonfiction. I mean, straight nonfiction or prescriptive nonfiction. So they're weaving their story into the actual nonfiction book. But all of that requires some novelist-like skill set, right? And then I really think that when it comes to prescriptive nonfiction, it is a creative process like any other. So I think, you have the novelist over here saying, oh, nonfiction is not anywhere near as creative. But I don't think that's true. I think any writing is really a creative endeavor. And, you're trying to take your reader into consideration and decide what's unique out there and create something that's totally new. That's a creative process, right? And I think all of that is creative. Plus, the thing to remember about nonfiction is that you're solving problems, and problem solving is creativity. If you were to, look at some definitions, problem solving is definitely creativity. And that's what nonfiction authors are doing. They're solving problems, they're answering questions. And again, I would just go back to, writing is creative no matter what type of writing you choose to do. And so I think we can separate this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And in fact, the act of creation is putting something new in the world. An idea, everyone can have ideas, but actually creation is making something new in the world, whether that's fiction or nonfiction or whatever else it is, a painting or whatever. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that I find the mindset issue with a lot of nonfiction authors is they feel that they can't use the word creative about themselves. If, for example, they write a technical manual on a programming language, they think, they might be labeled by someone as not creative. And it's like, no, that's crazy. You're creating value in the world and you're creating wealth out of those ideas. But related to that, so, your new book is Creative Visualization for Writers. So we're basically saying that's true for fiction or nonfiction or whoever.
Right.
Yeah, whatever you're writing. And I wanted to kind of start with the word visualization, I guess. What do you mean by visualization? Because I think some people might struggle with that word in the title.
Right. So it's basically using your mind's eye to picture what it is you want. Now, the very famous book that mine is titled after, it wasn't my choice, it was my publisher's, is Creative Visualization by Shakti Gawain, right? And her whole concept has been put forth into the law of attraction and deliberate creation. We've used lots of terms for this, but we're basically, you're using your mind to think about what you want. And that can be a successful career as an author. It can be more money. It could be a new car. But in what we're talking about in terms of writers, we're visualizing ourselves holding our book. We're visualizing people buying it at the bookstore. And the reason for that is because the more you visualize something as already having happened, the more you actually convince your subconscious mind that it's true. The subconscious mind doesn't have a way way to distinguish between what's real and what we picture. And that's why athletes use visualization all the time. It's not a different process. They're visualizing, let's say a marathon runner, I always use that as an example. They're visualizing themselves taking off in the first steps. How do they get going when the gun goes off, right? And then that middle part where their legs are tired, they can't breathe, they're so hot, they're just thinking, I can't do it, What do they do at that moment? They visualize in advance what they'll do there. How will they re-energize themselves? How will they shift their mindset to, I can do it. I know I can do it. I can do it. I'm doing it, right? And then, the runners who always at the end of those marathons, they suddenly, the last 2 miles, they just like fly ahead, right? And they win. This is what they're visualizing. Okay, I'm at the 2-mile mark. What happens here? And the body, as they're visualizing this, the mind is sending signals to the body, firing off muscles just as if they were running the race. It's the same thing. So we're just trying to train ourselves in advance to be able to do what we want to do. So it could be sitting down and writing, right, every day. Visualize that before we ever get to the computer. But we can also visualize what we want to create because, not only are we convincing our mind, we're actually putting out energy. Our thoughts are energetic. And so we're putting out that energy. And that's why if you want a new blue Prius or Mercedes, I don't know if you have Prius over there in England, but if you want a new blue Mercedes, the more you think about wanting it and having it, the more you're going to see them around you.
Yeah, and it's interesting there. So you're talking about physical things, but when I think about back to 2006, I actually wrote an affirmation about my life, which it's similar to visualization, I guess. I wrote the affirmation, I am creative, I am an author. And at the time I couldn't even say it out loud. I wrote it down. I wrote that over and over again. I said it in my mind, but until I couldn't say it out loud for a number of years. And of course, 10 years later, I'm living that affirmation. And I am creative, I am a writer doesn't necessarily have a physical, it has a physical manifestation, but I was imagining that kind of future life. So how do people come up with what their affirmation should be, even at the point where they might not believe it? And of course, most of the listeners, it will be things like seeing my book, on the bookstore, or making the New York Times list, or leaving my job, because these are hard to even conceptualize when you're a long way away.
Right. And I want to say that before I answer that affirmations are kind of they're like a lead-in to your visualization, right? Because you said, I'm creative, I'm a writer, and I don't know what you thought about when you did that, but when we say those words, we're thinking it, right? And if you can actually sit down and visualize, what would that mean? What does it look like to have that life, a creative life, a life as a writer? What does that look like? So that becomes a physical thing, right? And you're feeling it, and you're thinking it, and you're focused on it. But so to answer your question, there really are 2 ways to create an affirmation. Typically, what happens is we notice that we have a negative thought or a limiting belief. I'm not creative. I can't write. I'll never be a writer. I'll never be an author. Whatever it is. This is too hard. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not a good enough writer. And so we notice that. And what we want to do is turn that around. So we want to create an affirmation that is, I am a writer. I am creative. Every day I write. Instead of saying, I can't write, we're affirming every day I'm becoming a better and better writer. And I'm doing that by sitting down at my desk and I'm writing. Right? So that's number 1. Number 2 is to begin with what you want to create. You wanted a career as a writer. And so we begin there. I'm a writer. I'm creative. I have a career as a writer. And no, at first the mind is going to say, that's not what we have. And so that's why sometimes it's better to not say, I have a career as a writer, if we're struggling with that. Better to say I'm creative, I'm a writer, and then do affirmations of action. Actually sit down and do the action, right? Because you have to affirm it, and then you have to actually take action towards it.
Yeah, and I think that's, I've said before on the show that I believe, whatever you want the word, in the law of attraction, as in I've used it in my life to create the life that I want. But I think that some of the more mainstream books like The Secret haven't really emphasized the action part of attraction.
Right.
So, you've worked with a ton of successful authors. What are the actions that they take to manifest those visualizations in the world that other people can model?
So I think that so first of all, action really is where the action is. And I think for anyone listening, whether you believe in the law of attraction or not, this I think was the missing piece. We talk a lot about visualizing and affirming and all of that, but you have to actually do something in the world for something to happen. So actually the Kabbalists would say that action is where the action is. So what do successful authors do? What actions do they take that make them successful? First of all, they write regularly, whether it's a blog or articles or a manuscript. They're not just talking about writing, they're writing. Right? So that's the first action, is if you want to be a writer, you have to write. And we've all heard that, right? The other thing is they're moving through their fear and insecurity. This is an action. They do what they know they need to do, and they do it courageously. That could be sending out a query letter or getting up on stage to speak or self-publishing or whatever it is, they're doing it. I mean, I can't imagine that you, in all these years, that you didn't have moments where you'd felt afraid or insecure, and yet your books are out there, right? Your blog is out there. You took action on that. They also do things that they'd rather not do. So what I hear from a lot of aspiring authors is, I really want to be an author, and everybody keeps talking about platform, and I just, I don't want to do that. I don't like promoting. Successful authors do that. That's an action they take. They embrace this as part of becoming successful, and they build platform. They promote their books. They take care of business because it is a business. I think they also do spend time visualizing. I think they're visionaries. They see the future, their future. They're mystics about their own lives. And so they spend a lot of time planning and thinking about it. And how will I get there? And what do I really want? And why do I want it? Right? And in that way, they are utilizing, whatever you want to call it, the conscious creation or Napoleon Hill's principles and Think and Grow Rich. Right? They're spending time thinking and feeling what they want as if it's already created. And then they take that action towards towards whatever they want, whatever is necessary. They're doing it. They're not holding back. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, we could pick apart lots of little things they do, but I think the last thing I'd say is that they're working on their mindset, because we stop ourselves. Other things don't stop us. Yeah, we might have challenges, that come up, but we don't. Those don't stop us. It's our response to that stops us, and typically that's happening up here. And so, successful authors take action in terms of working on their personal development. They're trying to change their negative thoughts. They're trying to be more courageous, more secure, more confident. They're trying to be more productive, to have more energy, to be clear about where they're going, to influence themselves to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's why I wrote the Successful Author Mindset earlier this year, because I was amazed that people didn't realize that everyone feels this self-doubt. And it's how you just not overcome the self-doubt, but how you live with it, how you just live with the feelings of I'm not good enough, and yet you do it anyway. And in fact, this creative dissatisfaction seems to be an important part of creativity, because if you were happy with what you created, you could just go die, right? I mean, you've finished. But if you create something and then you're like, there are a few things that I need to improve, I'm going to write something else, and I've got these other things. And the point is, we're never finished until we do die, which I think is really cool. But I also wanted to ask you there, you mentioned the sort of self-help, the learning, as well as the craft stuff. And so that action stuff is really important. But the other thing, and you also mentioned sort of having to learn platform, but I really like Tony Robbins talks about this sort of what will you give up, or what will you give in order to achieve what you want? Because you can't just say to the universe or creative spirit or God or whatever you believe in, I want to be a successful writer. Just give it to me. There has to be something that you give up. And for many writers, it's time. But what are some of the trade-offs that writers make along the journey?
Yeah, I think we do make a lot of trade-offs, and I would hope that anyone listening doesn't see the trade-offs or this giving up as something negative, because it's getting us where we want to go, right? So I think that's important. And along with Tony Robbins, I already mentioned Napoleon Hill, but he also emphasizes both giving and receiving, right? And so I think that and anyone who's read any of my work knows I'm really into Jewish mysticism, into Kabbalah. And there's this whole idea of giving. It's a continuum of giving and receiving. But, so that's just important to keep in mind, because I think giving and receiving are kind of intricately linked. But so what do you have to give up? What are the payoffs? I think that you have to be willing to get very conscious of your mindset and what you're thinking and give that up, because typically that insecurity, those negative thoughts are not helping us. And so we're doing something to change that and to change our habits, right? Because we have, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so one of the things we have to do is change ourselves. So that's a giving up of what we normally would do in order to do something different that's going to help us succeed. You also have to be you have to commit to follow through. So if you start, you're going to have to look at, what do I have to do to finish this? So maybe you had to give up time to even get started, but in order to finish it, is there anything else you have to change or give up? Basically, you're giving up anything that doesn't support your goals, and that could be television time, right? Or it could be reading that novel every night in bed instead of going to bed earlier so you can get up earlier and write. You might have to give up people who don't believe in you, because they're holding you back, right? You have to, as you said, give up time. Sometimes you have to give up money, right? It's a sacrifice if you're achieving any goal. But going back to Tony Robbins, he would say that you need to only speak and see the truth. And so I think for me, that's giving up false stories that we create. That idea that I can't do it, or it's hard.
I don't have the time. Yeah. Who has the time?
Exactly. So it's giving up denial, Joanna, because these are excuses we have, and we have to give those up. See, I think more than anything else, we could say give up, watching TV and reading books and going out for lunch with your buddies or whatever. We could talk about all of that. But the fact is that this is about having no excuses. If this is what you want to do and you're committed to it, then you have to honestly look at yourself and say, what is holding me back? What are the stories I'm telling that are not serving me and getting where I want to go? And I think that is the biggest thing we're giving up, is our habits, our mindsets, our stories, so that we can actually move towards our goal.
And that visualization is kind of visualizing a new story. About what your life will look like. But it's interesting because, the money thing and the time thing, when I wanted to do this, I would get up at 5 a.m. and write before work. And then I went to 4 days a week and gave up 20% of my income in order to do this. And then, eventually gave up my job. And I think it took 4.5 years to get back to the same income I was on when I quit my job. So, but those were things I was willing to do because that was more important to me. And you talk in the book about values, which I think is so important. And again, it's, obviously we read the same self-help books like Tony Robbins, because values are so important, and deciding what your value is. And for me, when I did, the sort of idea around values, I come up with freedom over and over again. Freedom is my number one value, which shapes decisions like location independence and running my own business and not answering to anyone else. And I like money, but I was willing to give up money to have freedom and build that up. So, how have values impacted your own journey? So make it kind of personal, and how does that shape your work? And also, how can people decide what the values are?
So, like you, I value freedom a lot. I haven't worked for somebody in I don't know how many years, and I'm lucky to have a husband who has supported me quite a bit financially. But that definitely was a value for me. It was freedom, but I think I also think of that as independence, right? I don't want to work for a boss. I want to be independent and do what I want to do. So I think the two go hand in hand. So that's definitely influenced me working for myself for all these years, and finding ways to earn an income from what I know how to do rather than going into an office. I think I value almost more than that, making a difference. I think that informs what I do daily, even blogging. I mean, like you, I'm a big blogger. I mean, I actually have several blogs, and I was thinking about it just the other day. Why the heck do I keep doing this? Because
I have that a lot.
Yeah. And everybody keeps saying, Nina, you do so much, you need to give up a blog. And I'm like, I can't give up my blogs. First of all, they promote my work, but beyond that, I actually like writing them. I'm a writer at heart. Yes, I speak and I train and I coach and I do all these things, but I started out as a writer. And so I really feel like I make a bigger difference with my blogs than I do with my books. And I hate to really say that, but more people read my blogs every day than read my books.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little sad to admit, but it's true. And the fact is that I get more like emails and comments from people reading my blog, who will take the time to write to me and say, thank you so much for writing that. That made a difference to me. And so that making a difference is a huge value of mine. And I think a lot of my work revolves around making a difference, whether I'm educating or inspiring someone to write a book or start a blog, when I'm writing something for publication or coaching, it's about making a difference. And then I think another value I have is what I would call, personal power personal power. It goes with personal development, right? It's that I am able to discipline myself, right? And that I am willing to change, to see how I need to change in order to grow and be better and succeed. So it's this working on myself to change. And so self-empowerment, I think, goes along with this idea of helping others, transforming others. I'm basically empowering others. And so a lot of my work revolves around empowering others as I'm also trying to empower myself.
Oh, I think we're exactly the same person.
We like each other.
I mean, that empowerment message, like I feel that's the message of the Creative Penn, is it's empowering creatives and authors to understand their own worth almost, because it's incredible to me how many creative people just haven't put any sort of value on their own worth, and their mindset is always a kind of negative one. So I really like what you were saying there. And I guess when we're saying shaping the values, do you think those values came out of your action? So you took action and then you developed those values? Or do you think you always had those values first? So what came first, the action or the values? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think values... I think we develop values over the course of our life. Some of them are given to us by our family or our environment, and some of them we develop. I'm thinking back that I started reading probably one of the first, I guess I would call it personal development books or practical spirituality books that I read was Richard Bach's Illusions.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh my God, this is so great. And so in that sense, it was something that developed. It started there, and I developed a passion for personal development and personal growth and spirituality and metaphysics. And how does this all work? How do we create something from nothing in our lives, right? And so yeah, and I think for everybody, they have to look at that. How do they develop their values? Well, some of them are given to us, and others really what we value, right? So we have to begin to question them.
Yeah, and others develop over time. And, particularly important because this will go out in the beginning of the new year. And as we're recording this, the end of 2016, it's been a very difficult political year for both America and the UK. We've had, and continuing into Europe. And I mean, a difficult time, and there's a lot of I think there's way too much negativity in the world, like in terms of the press, and I get emails from people who feel very affected by this sort of negative shift. And what does that mean? How can we keep this creative, positive, action focused visualization? How do we keep on that straight and narrow path and not get distracted by all the naysayers and the winds of change or whatever? How do we stay on the path?
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know if you know this, but in 2015, I became a certified high performance coach. I had been studying Brendan Burchard's work and had been gone to some of his events, and I actually was coached by one of his coaches and decided to become a certified high performance coach. And the reason was because I look at people like him and Tony Robbins, and they're so disciplined, right, about where they focus their attention. And you can talk to other people who will say, I don't watch the news or what, but it was more, I'm looking at them and they're so disciplined. I mean, in a good way, not, we have negative connotation to that, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that when you ask, how do we not get distracted? How do we not get swayed by this? And here in the States, I can tell, I don't even like going to Facebook anymore. I'm like, how do you get anything done? Mm. So for me, it's this self-discipline. It's personal growth. I became a certified high-performance coach because what I see is that writers don't write.
Yeah.
Right? They don't write and they don't build platform and all these other things because of what's going on here and because they don't have self-discipline. One of the things we talk about in high-performance coaching is influence or persuasion. Well, for a writer, influence is hugely important, right? We need to have influence in our target market. But before we can even do that, we have to have influence over ourselves. We have to be able to persuade ourselves not to go to Facebook when we're supposed to be writing, to not think about what's happening in the world when we're supposed to be writing. And I'm not saying you have to stick your head in the sand, right, and not be aware. And, if you want to be an activist, to not do those things. But if you want to create something in terms of written words, you have to learn the discipline that goes with that. And the other thing is that the people get negative and they get depressed, right? And we have control of that. And I'm not talking somebody who's clinically depressed, okay? But just sort of the general malaise, right? We have control over that. We can generate a different state of being. We can generate different energy. We can generate a different mindset. It's all a decision. It's like Tony Robbins says, a decision happens in a moment. And
you can change your life in that moment. Yeah,
that's right. Then you have to be committed to that change. And and as he says, you have to take massive action. So it isn't like saying, oh, I'll just turn off Facebook. It's, I have decided to to go to Facebook only 30 minutes a day. And it's after I've done all my writing, because during my writing time, I'm going to focus on this. And I'm not only going to focus on my project, I'm going to come to that project with a positive and enthusiastic mindset and with energy. And so what am I going to do that? I'm going to do, Tony doesn't call them affirmations. He calls them incantations, right? So I'm going to get to my desk. The only difference between those two, by the way, is that you're using your whole body and you're saying the stuff out loud. So it's really like an incantation. But, so I'm going to come into my office and I am going to stand in front of my desk and I am going to say, I am creative. I am a writer. I am an author. I'm ready to write. Yes. And you're going to have your little power move, yes. And you're going to do all that, right? And then you're going to sit down and you're going to do 30 deep breaths or whatever it is to energize yourself. So that's the difference. I think it's a matter of the self-discipline and commitment to actually protecting your writing space, protecting your own well-being.
Yeah, and I would say to all the quiet British people listening, you don't have to go all full-on American screaming. Right. But no, I do. I mean, I agree with you. And I think and I agree with Tony's thing about you can change your life in a moment if you take action and make that thing. And I think when I decided on that affirmation, I am creative, I am a writer, I think I changed my life. I think I set off the path that has led me here today by that one decision of what my creative visualization is, which is why I think your book is really interesting, because I think it will help some people get to that point, right? They'll get to the point of helping them decide what that might be for them. And people listening, you don't have to be a full-time writer. That might not be the thing that you want to eventually achieve, but there you go. Anyway, I also want to ask you before we finish, for two more questions. One about blogging, because you are a big blogger, as you said, and you and I have connected over the years through blogs. We met very early on, I think, like 2009, I think we first crossed paths on Twitter and blogging. And I know a lot of people have doubts about blogging now because the world is even more noisy. What do you think in terms of blogging for a non-fiction author in particular? Is it still necessary for a non-fiction author to have a blog, or what do you recommend?
I still recommend it to every client that, and at every conference, because since it is so noisy, the point is that we as authors, we want to have visibility online, right? We need to be findable, discoverable. And the best way to do that is with a blog, because Google is cataloging, it's indexing the new content that you're putting up there. And if you're writing on one topic, then you're going to rise up in the search engine results pages. I mean, how to blog a book. When I started that blog, I had nothing. I started from scratch like everyone. And at first there were no readers. And in 5 months, I had #1 Google search engine results status, and I've retained it because I wrote about one topic and I wrote frequently and consistently, and I kept up with it, right? I mean, all these years, I could have left it be after the book came out. But so I think if you want to be discoverable, you have to be blogging. And the other thing for a nonfiction author is that you want to be seen as the expert. You have to be the authority. And so there's this whole idea of authority blogging. But I think if you're writing on you're an authority blogger. If you're writing on a topic as an authority, even if you're learning as you go, which most of us are, and even if you're just sharing what you've learned, you are the expert then, the authority. And you then have first of all, there's that. You put yourself out there as an expert. Number 2, you have expert content, valuable content to share. And I think the biggest problem is if you don't have a blog, what are you going to share? You're only going to share other people's stuff. And I'm all for curating content. I think it's important. But more important is to share your own content across the social networks. And if you don't blog, you don't have that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And in fact, I am doubling down on content in 2017. Like, I feel like I want to do more content, not just books, but more blogging and, more audio and more video. And it's funny because, I think people feel like it's too late, but we're only just beginning. There are billions more people arriving on the internet shortly.
Right. That's right. And there's so much you can do. I mean, like the video, I think the video is enormously important today. But you still need to have content, written content. Google is still looking for a minimum of 300 words underneath that video on your blog if you want to be indexed well, So there's so much we can be doing and combining it, and like the podcasting and so you take the audio. We can do so much, and I think it's more important than ever. I think the noisier it is, the more you have to not shout, but just continue to speak and put yourself out there so that the right people find you. And by right people, I mean your people, the people who need to hear your message, that want to hear your story.
And of course, you become an authority by putting it out there. Neither of you or I were an authority before we started doing this. And then you become one over time. So don't worry if you're listening and you're like, I'm not an authority. No, none of us started out that way.
That's right. I mean, think about my blog, How to Blog a Book. Excuse me. I was never set out to be a blogging expert. I just saw the blog to book deals happening and said, what if you just wrote the darn book on your blog instead of trying to figure out what to do with all that content afterwards? And I wrote it, and I blogged it, wrote it, and suddenly I'm a blogging expert and a marketing expert. Because of that, they think I'm a marketing expert. And I'm like, really? But that's what happened.
Well, and this leads me into the final question, which is about longevity and also making multiple streams of income, both of which, you have. So if you had written How to Blog a Book and then only done that, would you have a full-time business? I don't know. I mean, maybe you would, but actually now you've got all these different things going on. You have not stopped at one book. You've not stopped at one blog. You doing all this other stuff. So how, and I've said this to other people I've known for years online. How did you make it through? Because so many people that we met back in 2009 have disappeared. So how have you continued to do this? And what are your secrets for balancing creative with earning money and growing your business?
So I think the reason that I've stuck with it is, first of all, I'm enormously stubborn. Like, I really hate to fail and to give up on things. So that's number one. Once I start something, I really feel committed to finishing it. And I think a lot of people start a blog, for instance, and then they go, oh, this is too hard, and they just give it up. And that's just not me. I think, though, that beyond commitment is purpose and passion. I think if you don't feel a sense of purpose for what you're doing, and that ties into your values, of course. Excuse me. And if you don't feel passionate about it, then you're going to have a hard time sustaining it long term. I always talk about that, you have to combine your purpose with your passion, and that's when you get inspired and you take inspired action. And I think that when you feel like you're on purpose and you're doing something you're passionate about, you will be inspired to action on a continual basis. So I think that makes a big difference. I think there's also that desire to share your message or your story or your expertise. And if you have that strong sense of, I really want to help people, I want to serve, you're going to keep going, even if you have 5 readers or you sell 2 books, right? You're just going to keep going. So I think it really comes down to your big why. Why are you doing this? Are you emotionally connected and committed to the work you're doing? In terms of growing my business, I do a lot of planning and brainstorming. I'm really kind of never like you were talking about, I'm never satisfied, which, could be a bad thing, but I'm just always looking for how to improve and what I could do next. And I have a lot of ideas. There was a time in my life I thought I had no ideas. Now I suffer from, too many ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the past, I threw them out there as fast as I got them, which is why I have a ton of courses and nobody knows about them, because I would create them, right? And then I didn't promote them because I was on to the next thing. And so these days, I think in terms of being successful, what I'm trying to do is to focus on a few things. No, I'm not going to get rid of my blogs. I'm still going to have my little umbrella site, ninaamir.com, which leads you to all the different things I do. But I'm going to focus on building a few things per year. Which doesn't necessarily mean I'm not going to offer something new, but I'm going to limit how many things I'm taking on. There'll be rhyme or reason to it, as opposed to, oh, that's a good idea, I'll do that. This is what I'm focusing on this year. So it's looking at where I want to go and what I want to do and creating the business around that, while keeping in mind my readers and clients and customers. What do they want? But also, what do I want? Because I think if we're not doing, in terms of sustainability, if you're not doing what you want to do, you will not keep it up. So it's that happy medium between what do my readers and clients and customers want and what is it that I want. And when you can find that happy medium, I think that really helps.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And those people who have stayed in the niche like us, I feel we really do love it, and we work hard and we love it working hard, and we're passionate about helping other people and creating things in the world. So yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to you, and tell people where they can find the book and you, and where would you like them to go?
So the easiest place to go is to ninaamir.com. So ninaamir.com. To find the book, there are some books there as well that aren't on Amazon. But to find the majority of my books that are available on Amazon, you can go to booksbyninaamir.com. So booksbyninaamir.com, pretty simple. And then, there are links to all my blogs right on ninaamir.com. But for those really interested in nonfiction, they can go to writenonfictionnow.com. For those interested in blogging, they can go over to howtoblogAbook.com.
You have so many URLs that are really good.
Thank you. But I just went through my whole list of URLs and it said, do not renew. Do not renew. Spending so much money on URLs I've never used and probably never will. So
I know that. I've got a really good idea, so I'll buy the URL so that I can do the idea later.
That's right. Exactly. Oh, and I have a page on author coaching. I need something on author coaching. Oh, I have a coach, something on blogging. I need the URL on blogging. So, yeah.
Yeah. So everyone listening, do what we say. Don't do what we do. Anyway, Nina, look, lovely to talk to you. And thanks so much for your time.
You're very welcome. I was honored to be on the podcast and great to see you and talk to you.